Here to set you free. How you doing? Happy Friday. Thank God it is Friday. I am in a stressful position today. My children find out where they go to high school in September, if you can imagine. It's been a nail biter. And I'm not a big prayer person, but I was on my knees praying last night, let me tell you. Anyway, happy Friday. Good to have you with us here on the only true democracy and talk. Thank you for listening to us on radio, on stream, on podcast, and watching us on Twitter's Periscope, Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live, and did I miss one? YouTube Live. This show is very exciting today. We have back with us Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Now, the AAM is a partnership established by some of America's leading manufacturers and the United Steelworkers Union. And for well over a decade, Scott and the AAM have worked to make American manufacturing a top-of-mind issue for voters, hello, infrastructure bill, and our national leaders through effective advocacy, innovative research, and a savvy PR strategy. Please check out their website, americanmanufacturing.org. Oh, that's attractive. Isn't that good? That's what live is all about.
Bless
Excuse
you.
me. Thank you. The website is americanmanufacturing.org. On Twitter, at Keep It Made in USA, which the president wants and which we really should do. We're finding out dependency on things from other countries is not working out so well. And follow Scott at Scott Paul, AAM. Scott, more than a pleasure to have you with us on this Friday. There's so much to talk about, and I'm very excited to talk about it with you. Thanks for joining us and coming back.
Leslie, thanks for having me on. Fingers crossed for you. Know how stressful that is. I guess the only silver lining is that it's good prep for college admissions in 4 years.
Yeah, you know, somebody told me though yesterday. Somebody told me actually it was like a doctor of mine that their kids are grown now, but they went to these same schools and through this process, and her daughter actually went to the school my daughter wants to go to, and she said college was easier because there were more of them, and with college you get accepted at a number of them. These schools kind of talk to each other. It'll be like, well, you take Scott, I'll take Leslie. So you might end up with one or two, but it's more like you get in one and get waitlisted at the other. Everybody gets into their dud choice, but I should say their last choice, you know. But yeah, that's the situation. I know you know what I feel you were sharing with me about. You know, I'm glad your son got in where he wanted. Let's talk about your great piece, your opinion piece, entitled Biden's Policies Are Creating a Legitimate Manufacturing Return. When the president had a State of the Union address, which must have gone over well because his approval ratings increased, and I feel he kind of reset, look, I know what people out there tell you I'm about, my party's about, this administration and our goals are about, but here's what it is. And I think when people heard that, they were just like, yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's what I'm interested in, what I'm about. And not just Democrats, we saw independents as well. Politics aside, because I know the AAM is nonpartisan, but something the AAM obviously cares a lot about is manufacturing returning, which all comes under the umbrella of the economy, right? And the economy is the most important issue to voters, whether it be inflation, prices at the pump, jobs, and this all, comes under the same heading of manufacturing within that umbrella. The president talked about in the economic agenda his commitment to American manufacturing. Was it just lip service? And is it something that not just you needed to hear and were relieved to hear, but that started showing a pathway toward what he was talking about and toward that commitment?
Sure, Leslie. Well, Biden put jobs, made in America, manufacturing, front and center after, obviously, he dealt with the crisis in Ukraine, which is incredibly important, and Russia's invasion thereof. And I would say that, there are lots of presidents who do talk about this. I mean, our last president talked about it a lot. Barack Obama talked about Made in America. I remember it was the centerpiece of his 2012 State of the Union address. And I don't expect Americans to remember that because most people forget the State of the Union address the day after it's given. But those of us in public policy tend to remember these things. I would say the thing that sets Biden's both record, policies, speech apart is that he does have some things to show for it already. he pointed out, and he's right about this, that last year we added more manufacturing jobs than we have for any year in the last 30 years, which is incredible to think about. I mean, there were a lot of things that I'm sure people thought Joe Biden would do. You know, he kind of has that blue collar street cred. I don't think creating 360 some thousand manufacturing jobs was probably one of them. I'm not sure I thought that that was possible, but here we are, and this didn't happen by accident. I mean, some of this is obviously the economy is opening back up. We continue to grow. You'll get some manufacturing jobs that way, but there are a couple of other things going on here. First are the policies that he's put into place, and they range from infrastructure investment, which creates demand for manufactured materials, which will mean more jobs in factories, to other ways to strengthen and grow the economy and encourage supply chains to come back to the United States through procurement policies. Buy America, it's called. And I know that we'll get into that a little bit too, but that attracts investment that might have gone to another country into the United States, because if they want to serve the federal procurement market, which is very big, it's like $500 billion, they got to make it here. And so they got to locate their factory here. And some companies have done that because Biden's made that an issue. And so I think, and then on top of that, and I think this is the other important thing, I think corporate America, and I'm not going to say this is everybody, but I think at least some companies have discovered that maybe they went a little too far in globalizing their supply chains and stringing them out all over the world and making them subject to shipping delays or conflict or natural disasters or other things that are beyond their control. And if they want to continue to serve the American consumer market, maybe they should make them in the United States. And I think some companies, not everybody yet, but I think some companies have discovered that. So there you go. You know, I remember, and you probably do too, lots of smart people said like a decade ago, well, factories are never coming back. We're never going to see big factories come back to the United States. And we saw a bunch of big factory announcements that have been made over the past 12 months about factories that are indeed coming to the United States of America. And each one of these factories is going to employ more than 1,000 people. So there is something going on here.
You know, life is different inside the Beltway than outside the Beltway, right?
Yeah.
But what you talked about, last year, the stock market had a 27% increase. We've had more jobs under this president and this administration created for decades. And the United States is leading the world in economic rebound from this pandemic. I'm going to ask you something. It's not too political, but you know, with that being said, and we'll get to Buy American next. With that being said, why is it one of the Democrats were having their little powwow, you know, their retreat, and one of the Democrats said, the American people love our policies, and look at all the good that's happened, you know, because of it. So why do they hate us so much, or why don't they like the president more? And I was just wondering, because you talk with these workers, you know what I mean? You talk with, you know, these voters across the board. Why do you think that is? Because, you know, really, you're talking about job creation. You're talking about Wall Street. You're talking about clearly a turnaround. A lot of people even say, you know, on paper, this just doesn't match, you know, what the approval ratings are, even though they've come up, of him and of Democrats. And of course, that's a concern for me as a Democrat going into midterms.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. There's some things that I know, and there's some things that I have a good hunch about. I think one thing that is clear is that people's views of the economy have become far more politicized over the last 10 years, coming out of the Great Recession. And even if Obama had like some success, Republicans didn't want to give him credit for that. And obviously that expanded, you know, opposite in the Trump administration. And so, yeah, you're right. The metrics are good, but I think it's easy, depending on where you consume your news, to all you hear about are gas price hikes and regulations and other stuff like that. And so I think that's a big piece of it as well. And then on the policies, you're right. People love Democratic policies. But it's the emotional or value connection that I think they struggle with. Do they understand who I am? Because most Americans don't have a four-year college degree, but Democrats tend to talk to people like they always do.
Oh, very good point. We're going to come back with Scott Paul, president of AAM. Right after this, when we come back, we're going to talk about Buy American, which you should. I'm Leslie Marshall.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with big hugs and kisses.
I want to get back to football games with my boys.
I want to get back to feeling and touching, connecting with the people around
That was an
me.
accident, Mark.
And my grandma's mac and cheese.
I want to get back to real grocery shopping. Taking my time, walking down every aisle, smelling the tomatoes and melons, having a free sample or two, or three.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. But now, there are vaccines. And they are the first step that let us get back to feeling optimistic about the days ahead of us. It's okay to have questions.
Is it safe?
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Now, get the facts. Learn more at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hey sis, missed you this morning. Kim told me you weren't feeling well, so I'm just doing a self-care check.
Oh, thank you, friend.
How you doing?
Girl, listen, my energy was so low because I didn't eat breakfast when I got up, so I had to miss virtual yoga with y'all.
Trust me, I understand.
But I'm doing much better now that I've eaten, so I'm back on track.
Great. In that case, let's get some steps in tonight. I'll come over and we can walk around the lake.
Sounds good. Appreciate you being in my business, too. Now, let me get in yours. Did you check your blood pressure today?
I did that and my squats, okay?
Okay.
High blood pressure is not going to be my friend if I can help it. See you at 6?
Let's get it. See you then.
Now more than ever, it's important that we protect our hearts and the hearts of those we love. Check in on one another and be a part of a healthy blood pressure movement. Rally your squad to take the online pledge at releasethepressure.org. Brought to you by the Release the Pressure Coalition and the Ad Council.
Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1950. That was the day 4,600 baggage handlers, mechanics, and store personnel ended their strike against American Airlines. The 11-day strike affected airports in 34 cities, crippling 80% of Americans' operations. Transport Workers Union leader Mike Quill demanded wage increases, job security, and the guarantee against subcontracting out of maintenance work. The transport workers had been locked into negotiations and mediation for months leading up to the strike at the beginning of March. In her book, On the Ground, Labor Struggle in the American Airline Industry, Liesl Miller-Ornick notes that the strike was an example of cross-skill solidarity within the union. Union baggage handlers were the first to walk out. Quill hoped to garner support by emphasizing that the planes were improperly maintained. He demanded that President Truman take over the airlines on the basis that the planes were unsafe for public transportation. Support for the strike remained strong in larger cities, but in smaller cities, strikers looked to return to work. Miller-Ornick adds, the strike victory resulted in industry firsts, a severance package for laid-off workers, and a company policy pledging only to subcontract mechanical work that American Airlines employees did not have time to do. Though they did not gain wage increases, they did win significant increases in sick leave, 3 weeks paid vacation after 12 years of service instead of 15, and paid meal times for night shift workers. Transport Workers Union members at Pan Am were inspired to strike over similar demands 2 months later. The victory at American spurred national mediators to hammer out a settlement in favor of Pan Am strikers only 17 hours after the strike was called. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
We are back with Leslie Marshall. Happy Friday, TGIF. We have with us Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. And check out the website. Like I said, there's so much information on there. I get information on there. If you want to keep it made in USA, well, check out their website. They always have and spotlight different companies that are American made and they tell you about the companies, where you can get the stuff. And almost everybody has the ability to ship when you can purchase online if you're not near a store, or if you're one of those people that's kind of like staying home and doesn't want to get out as much. AmericanManufacturing.org. Also on Twitter, follow at Keep It Made in USA. They give a lot of information, not just about manufacturing, but about what we're going to talk about, Buy American, how you can, where you can, and from whom you can. And Scott, follow him at Scott Paul, AAM. So let's talk Buy American for a minute. And specifically, you had mentioned in the last segment, Scott, and also the president mentioned in a State of the Union address, the infrastructure bill that was passed that was bipartisan. And specifically within that legislation, he spoke of Buy American commitments, in those. And that's great, and great for companies. But don't we have even more incentive now when you have Russia that has invaded Ukraine, and when you have one by one they're coming out, right? But I threw out my Coke Zero when Coca-Cola wasn't going to leave Russia. Now they have. I wasn't going to go to McDonald's when they weren't going to close down, which they did, 800 locations in Russia. We have that power, and I think if something is, I think people are looking like, what kinds of vodka aren't made. I like Belvedere; it's really expensive, but it's made in Poland. But things that we can get from Russia, and then China as well. And I say that because China, the president of China and Vladimir Putin are buddies. And I think the American people in the Western world, because we make up more than 50% of the world's income, in the Western world, and together China and Russia make up less than 20%. That is really where we have power, is with our consumerism and with our dollar and what we spend it on and where we spend it. So can you speak to that? Because I think what's happening in the world right now should push us to want to buy American even more, not just to support so many people coming out of a pandemic who are reopening or trying to start up a business.
I totally agree. And I can speak to both what we can do as private citizens, what companies can do, and then what the government can do, because I think it's important. And Leslie, you probably remember the divestment campaign around apartheid in South Africa.
Absolutely.
From the 1980s. And it took years to get companies to pull out of South. It took years, and many did it reluctantly. And the power of the digital economy and consumer voices and social media, this is one case where it worked for good. And some companies were a few days behind where they should have, but it was days. It wasn't years. It was days where they pulled out of Russia. China's a different story. There's many that are still entrenched in China that have no desire, I think, to get out, and it would take them a longer time to unwind, in part because they have so much production based there. Whereas in Russia, it was just kind of the Russian consumer market that they were serving. So it's a bit of an apples to oranges. It'll take longer in China, but I think companies have to be thinking about that with a lot of the actions the Chinese government is taking as well. But I think that is totally true, and we've seen that these Western brands have generally responded the right way to this pressure. Now, the government can obviously play a role in all of this too. It does it directly with bad actors through these sanctions, saying you just can't do business in Russia or pursue financial transactions. But the government can also set a great example through its own purchases. And this is something that, again, the Biden administration has not only talked about, but has done something about, where we have this massive amount of new investment coming in infrastructure. And $1.2 trillion will be spent in infrastructure over the coming years, everything from broadband to the bridges that we're going to be on. And there's a strong requirement in there that the materials for all of that, whether it's the optical cable for the broadband, the structural steel for the bridges, the rebar that goes into the roads, or the water pipes that will serve clean water to communities. They will have to be made in America because of a requirement that was agreed upon as one of the few bipartisan achievements, I think, that we've seen over the last year and a half. And Leslie, beyond that, for other purchases that the federal government makes, Biden is upping a Buy America requirement for that too. And it used to be the case that only just over 50% of a particular product had to be kind of finally assembled, the value added in the United States to qualify as made in America for a government purchase. That's going to move up to 75%. And so that's going to mean more investment in the U.S. economy, more jobs. And so he's headed in the right direction on this. It's long overdue. And it's actually, by the way, something Trump said that he would do something about, but really never did. So this is something where Biden has taken this issue and he's actually doing something about it. He's appointed someone who works inside the White House at OMB, who's the Made in America czar, basically, and is going to work throughout the federal government to get them to comply. And she's great. She used to work at the AFL-CIO, Celeste Drake, and worked for the Directors Guild and has all the right senses on this. And so you have someone who's going to be watching over this, literally as a watchdog within the federal government.
And that's incredible. You wrote in this great piece of yours that the president brought up domestic investment and the reshoring of supply chains, which we had talked about. You talked about 2021 last year, the year the factories really did come back to the American economy. And you said it's been a wave of reindustrialization that other presidents have promised to realize but failed to achieve. So let me ask you, that's all wonderful. Speech was wonderful. Legislation's wonderful. Job creation that we're going to get going forward and what we've seen thus far, incredible. But let's talk about inflation, right? The president, and I do believe the inflation is not Joe Biden's fault with one piece of legislation, for crying out loud. President Biden has a solution for high inflation. Some people say it's counterintuitive, but it would bring factory jobs back to the United States, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be a byproduct of this inflation plan?
That's right.
Can you speak to that briefly? And if we don't finish, we'll go into it in the next segment because I know we have a break soon.
I'll be happy to, because I'll break it down very quickly for folks. It's the right kind of supply side economics. You remember supply side economics from the
Absolutely.
Reagan era. It was trickle down. It was like, if you give these businesses tax cuts, wealthy investors tax cuts, the benefits will trickle down to the economy. That didn't work. This is the right kind of supply side economics work. If you build up the supply in the United States, if you know anything about economics, if the supply increases, the price is going to come down, which means inflation is going to come down. So it's a great plan, and there's some specifics that will allow it to happen that I'm very excited about.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk more about that and some other things here with Scott Paul. I'm Leslie Marshall. Be sure to check out their website, like I said, AmericanManufacturing.org. You want to buy American? There's companies out there that I didn't know were like, oh, they're made in America? Awesome. I'm already buying it. I'll buy more. Go to Twitter. Follow them there at Keep It Made in USA and follow Scott at Scott Paul, AAM. Back after this.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
Interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep. A message from StoryCorps, Love Has No Labels, and the Ad Council.
Republican politicos are all over Joe Biden for failing to stop inflation. Perhaps you wonder, though, what these squawkers would do if they were in charge. No need to wonder. Just look back to 1974, when Americans were being pummeled by price spikes that topped 12%, nearly double what we're enduring today. But by gollies, President Gerald Ford and his Republican contingent in Congress met the challenge head-on with a new magical program of economic uplift they called WIN, Whip Inflation Now. But it was nothing, just a political slogan with no magic and no action behind it. Price controls, antitrust action? No. GOP Inc. didn't want to offend, much less punish, corporate titans for a little profiteering. So they shifted the blame for inflation to consumers, demanding that families just say no to price gouging. Ford himself went on national TV, urging fellow citizens to join him in buying, quote, only those products and services priced at or below present levels. The core of the Republican program, then, was telling hard-hit wage earners to battle the monopolistic behemoths of big oil, big pharma, big food et al. On their own by simply refusing to pay inflated prices for the gasoline, medicines, groceries, and such that, hello, they had to have. As a reward, everyone who signed a form promising to be an inflation fighter was sent a nifty win button indicating their patriotic participation. Sure enough, Americans responded enthusiastically with an avalanche of ridicule. Even Ford's top economic advisor was whopper-jawed by the GOP's idea that the substance of their policy was a political button. It was surreal. I said to myself, this is unbelievable stupidity.
We are back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Our guest is Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. And Scott, it can be found at Scott Paul, AAM. Follow him there on Twitter. And the AAM can be found on Twitter at Keep It Made in USA. Go to their website, americanmanufacturing.org. There's a lot of valuable information. Scott, I know we have other things to talk about. I want to get to those as well. But, you know, you had spoken about the Reaganomics, the decades-long argument that employers move jobs abroad to lower their costs by relying on cheaper workers. But that trend contributed to almost 7 million U.S. manufacturing jobs in the past 22 years, since 2000. Inflation's at a 40-year high. And the president's argument is that globalization is stoking those higher prices, right? So he talks about two courses on inflation. Either pull back on support and cause wages and growth to cool, or it can get rid of the pressure points that can lead to inflation when emergencies and uncertainties occur by having more goods manufactured here in the United States. And I think we know that's essential after the recent disruptions in COVID-19, the pandemic, shortages of basic goods, semiconductors, destructive storms, wildfires, and now we have the Russian invasion of Ukraine that has sent oil soaring. The president said, quote, making it in America is one of the ways we can address our cost and supply chain challenges. You don't have a crystal ball, but I wanted you to speak to this. And maybe all of this bad will turn out to be good for manufacturing and increasing our position in the world as manufacturers, leading in manufacturing, perhaps once again, or getting closer to China with that. And, truly having Americans purchasing goods and more goods that are made here, which, would obviously create many more jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, it is I tell you what, it is sometimes hard to bite my tongue. What I want to say, we told you so. for
Right.
a long time about
Right.
this offshoring and what could happen with it. But I think that you're right, that if there is a silver lining to come out of all of this, it is a deeper understanding of the costs of globalization, of hyper globalization,
Right.
and supply chains that are strung all over the world in search of a low labor cost. Understanding that labor is a small cost of a manufactured good now, that a lot of it is about research and development and marketing and patents and shipping and lots of other stuff and markup, and that the actual labor cost is pretty small. And so if you're going around the world searching for that, you forget all of these other problems that can build up until there's a crisis, and then it hits you in the face. And that's exactly what's happened here with COVID, with some of the challenges with China, and now with the challenges with Russia. And some people will say, well, it costs more to manufacture in the United States. And the answer to that sometimes is yes, it does sometimes, although you don't have to buy, your sweatshirt every year. You have to buy it every 10 years instead. So you're actually saving money.
I was going to point that out. If you're buying one instead of 10, people don't realize you are spending more when you're getting that slashed price because you're getting a poorer quality, a lesser made product.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And the more you can control your own production, your own inventory, your own quality, you will be able to keep your costs down that way and to be able to respond to consumer demand. It's a lot easier to do it in the United States than to try to call up a subcontractor in China or India and anticipate what demand is going to be in a couple of weeks and what shipping is going to be and trying to make it all work. I think that too many people have discovered that is extraordinarily complex, and they can make good money when everything is running perfectly. However, I don't think that we can assume that everything is going to be running perfectly for a long, long time to come. And so just like there was this herd mentality that sent jobs out of this country starting a couple of decades ago, where company after company just went in search of looking for the lowest labor cost, the labor they could exploit in Indonesia or China or Mexico or wherever it was, in the environment that they could exploit as well, and that they were enabled by our tax policies, our trade policies that lowered tariffs as well. I think that there is a reckoning now, and there's an understanding that the way to right some of these wrongs and also deal with inflation and have it stabilize is to have more production occur in the United States. And I think that we can turn a corner here. I think that we'll have more semiconductor production in the United States that will lower ultimately the cost of electronics. We'll have more electric vehicle production here in the United States that will eventually lower the cost of electrical vehicles, clean energy manufacturing generation as well. And so all of this, I think, cumulatively will make a difference. None of it's going to switch off and on overnight. I mean, and I think that's the hard thing is people want something now. And what's driving a lot of the inflation now are just shortages because people are buying more stuff than they ever have been because they're not traveling anywhere. I mean, we used to spend more money on services, less on goods, and the COVID flipped that, and so I think some of that will smooth out. I think we'll get more production in the United States. I think some of this will, but it is going to take a little bit. I mean, this is not something that's going to turn around next week or in a month, but I think months from now, we will see some significant change. And the good part about this too, Leslie, is that means that there's going to be jobs that go along with it. There are going to be people working in these factories that are going to be earning really good money. And that's going to spin off other jobs in the economy.
That's my favorite four-letter word, jobs, JOBS. When we look at, the polls, right, regarding banning Russian oil, as the president did, it was 7 in 10 Americans said, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with paying more at the pump. Do it. Right.
Yeah.
So I wish that Americans 7 out of 10 would have the idea, I'm willing to pay a little bit more to get a better quality product, to keep it made here, and to provide a job for my neighbor.
Yeah.
And I feel that in COVID, at the beginning of it, we saw how maybe disconnected we were from that feeling, right? That we're all in this together. And if we can get to that and emulate the Ukrainian patriotism, I think we might be onto something, because not everything is blue and red, left and right, or Democrat and Republican. Not everything's political. And I think supporting, people say, don't go to the big chains, support those mom and pop businesses. Yeah. Well, a lot of those mom and pop businesses lost their business during the pandemic. And a lot of those mom and pop businesses lose, those people lose their jobs when these big factories have gone overseas year after year. So I think it's essential that we are more educated consumers, that we know what we're getting, where it was made, and that we have some kind of stream of consciousness about what we're buying. Certainly we have our things that are favorite, maybe not good for you, hello Coke Zero, but, at the same time, because we do have that choice, and we're very privileged to have that choice. Yes, it's expensive to live right now. Things are kind of tough. But I think we need to think of that and to see that. I want to move on to this. The president announced a tougher new rule for federal Buy America procurement. He finalized the new Buy American rule for federal procurement. For people that don't understand or that, aren't, reading all of this stuff, can you explain to folks what federal procurement is and what this new Buy American rule for federal procurement is and what that means to we the consumers and to jobs and manufacturing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the government is the largest consumer in the United States. It buys a lot of stuff, everything from office paper to consumer to electronics for its employees, right? To the federal vehicle fleet. And it builds buildings for federal offices. And so it is a business, really. And so there's been a requirement in the law since the mid-1930s that the government had to give a preference to American-made goods when it was purchasing goods for itself. But that became weakened over time, and it became weakened to the point that it was almost meaningless. And Biden came into office. He said, I'm going to fix this. We're going to make it have meaning again. And the rule that the Biden administration announced last week would do that. It would mean that Buy American means 75% of a good has to be made in America, as opposed to it was just over half, which will increase the amount of American-made content in government products that are being purchased by the federal government. There'd be more scrutiny over agencies that want to, waive this requirement and buy something from China, for instance. And so I think all of that is going to be helpful because you just said that consumers, we can do something about it. I think the government can set a great example too for us by saying, if we can buy American, you guys can find a way too. And so the other thing that Biden has done is create a website that would have both the federal procurement opportunities so that firms know that they can source to the federal government.
Hold that thought, because that's really important. And I don't think people, know all of the details. And that's a detail, now that you say it, I remember I really like a lot. We'll talk more about that. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back, talk more about buying American and the rules regarding federal procurement. We're also going to talk about not just workers who suffered, but specific groups of workers who suffered. We'll be back. I'm Leslie Marshall. He's Scott Paul, president of AAM. And we'll be back to you right after this.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. We show up differently, worship differently, and have found new ways to express our love and support to family and friends. But now there are vaccines, and they are the first step that lets us get back into the things we miss most, like spreading the word without spreading concern, girls tripping instead of solo sipping, brunching instead of late night munching, and talking smack with a side of mac and cheese. It's okay to have questions about COVID-19 vaccines.
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Is it safe?
Can I trust it?
What about pre-existing conditions?
Now get the facts. Visit getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when COVID-19 vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
911, what's your emergency?
America's healthcare system is broken and people are dying.
Welcome to Code WAC, where we shine a light on our callous healthcare system, how it hurts us, and what we can do about it. I'm your host, Brenda Gazar, this time on Code WAC. What are the most significant roadblocks in achieving single payer in Washington state? What strategies is the movement implementing as a result? We recently spoke to Whole Washington founder Georgia Davenport, who has helped lead the all-volunteer initiative effort for universal health care in the state.
I just went to Seattle over New Year's, and driving, it's just horrifying. Driving from here to there, seeing the conditions people are living in. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but a lot of bankruptcy and homelessness is actually a result of people not being able to afford their medical care. A few years back, there was a big news story in Bellingham about 2 seniors who committed suicide because they couldn't afford the pills for the wife. Things like that are happening all across our state, but we don't really hear much about it right now. There's a lot more happening in the news, but it's getting worse and worse out there. Seattle, you just see tons of tents. And the issue that I also see is like when somebody goes to the emergency room, they've been out in the cold and they don't have health insurance, the taxpayers are paying for that. So if we had a system where we didn't have any of those holes, and that's the funding for the whole Washington Health Trust would cover all of that.
Get the full Code WAC story on progressivevoices.com and on the PV app. Catch all our episodes by subscribing to Code WAC wherever you find your podcasts. This podcast is powered by Heal California, a nonprofit that uplifts the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform.
We are back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Happy Friday, TGIF. How you doing? We are with Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Their website for more information and where you can buy American, which is one of the things we're talking about in the show today, AmericanManufacturing.org. And on Twitter, follow them at Keep It Made in USA, them being the AAM. And Scott, follow him at Scott Paul, AAM. Scott, thank you for holding. Welcome back. We were just talking about, and you specifically were breaking down the tougher new rules for the federal Buy America procurement. And before the break, you were talking about a website. So this actually makes it even easier to apply by the new rule, to stay within the lines and to follow the new rules, right?
Yeah, it does, which is great. I mean, people, where do people get their information from these days? It's the internet, right? And so before federal procurement had been really hard to navigate unless you knew exactly where you were looking. So, but the Biden administration essentially set up a hub. It's called madeinamerica.gov, madeinamerica.gov. And anybody who wants to sell to the federal government can go there to see how to do it and also to see the waivers that the federal agencies have requested because they say they can't find this or that made in America. And an enterprising person can look at that and say, well, I can make this. And so, and can potentially.
So that can certainly help small business owners. It can help entrepreneurship and, again, more jobs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, imagine, what the web has done to expand opportunities for small shops. It's also created behemoths like Amazon and what have you. So I'm not going to pretend that it's all been perfect, but it's also expanded market opportunities for small enterprises that otherwise wouldn't have access to them. And so I'm excited about the potential. We have a lot more to do, but this is a good first step in at least getting the government to have Buy America really mean Buy America, and perhaps more of us can follow that example as well.
Absolutely. Anything else that you wanted to say on the federal procurement rules that have changed for the better for jobs and for American business owners, but obviously for American workers?
Right. I mean, the last thing I'm going to say, and I think this is important, is that this is something that Biden said he would do. He signed an executive order like one of the first weeks he was in office. He's following through on this. And this is a marked departure from the last president, who talked about this all the time, but did virtually nothing about it. And so it is that's as political as I'm going to get here. And people can take it or leave it. But if you look at the record here, you have a president who is actually doing something that he said he would do to make the government buy American products.
Absolutely. You and the AAM are nonpartisan. You're always going to like the president that is going to do the best for manufacturing and for the American workers, for the working class. So it doesn't matter if they have a D or an R. It's the individual who follows through on what they say with regard to manufacturing. And I would agree the president's done a lot of that. And I think a lot of people knew that, like unions, that and why they supported Joe Biden so heavily, because he's always been such a supporter of manufacturing, of union workers and things like that. So let's talk about workers. There were more than 5 million manufacturing jobs lost over the past 25 years due to the impacts of globalization. And we are seeing that new research from the Economic Policy Institute, the EPI, shows that the workers of color, people of color, workers of color, suffered the most. Were you surprised to see this or no?
Yeah, I personally was not surprised to see it, because I've been to many of these communities around the country and I've seen the devastation that's been caused. I do think that as it comes as a surprise to a lot of people in politics, and I'll tell you why, Leslie. It's because, it used to be the case where when you talked about factory jobs, it was popular with Democrats and Republicans, right? I think Trump's talked about factory jobs in a way that was divisive. And it was all about kind of like the grievances of the white working class man in particular. And so the factory person got cast as kind of this white working class man who's kind of angry. And the reality is that manufacturing has been diverse for a number of decades. And in fact gave Black workers, really many of them, the first opportunity to become part of the American middle class. And again, I think this is important because the vast majority of Americans will not get a four-year college degree. So ladders to the middle class are really important to be able to find. And the challenge that manufacturing workers faced initially, obviously, was discrimination, is that they would get the janitorial jobs, but not the well-paying jobs. And once the Civil Rights Act came about, that changed. And when manufacturing became more unionized and unions became much more attuned to civil rights, those opportunities flourished for Black workers. And there were many great examples of strong Black middle classes in cities like Gary and Youngstown and Baltimore and Detroit. And I could go on and on. There were tons of them. But then globalization hit, and these factories closed down. And what happened was, because there was still redlining in practice and all of this, a lot of these workers who formerly had factory jobs entered poverty, and these communities entered poverty and were never able to get out of it. And
they entered poverty because there was no factory. There was no job. That was not just the industry. That was it, right? Everybody in town worked at the factory or knew somebody who worked at the factory or did business with that factory if they owned their own business or worked for a different company. So, but also factory jobs, and correct me if I'm wrong, they still provide significant wage premiums compared to other sectors, right? So it wasn't just they had nowhere else to work, but if they did get another job, they couldn't get the same, amount of money, the same wages that they could with that factory job.
That's right. That's right. Very important point. I think that because services jobs increased and those opportunities increased throughout the last 20 years, but manufacturing job opportunities plummeted. And Black workers lost, I think, something like 750,000 manufacturing jobs almost out of that. And so, and that impacted, and again, entire communities, because that affects families and it has these spillover effects as well. What ended up happening, if a worker who lost his or her manufacturing job got another job at all, it likely had far fewer benefits, and it probably paid 20 to 30% less. And so if you think about that, that means...
Yeah, think about that. You're getting 20 to 30% less. You're now having to pay for your health insurance, maybe a life insurance policy. You have kids. You're not going to get paid if you had take a day off of work to take them to the doctors. I mean, whatever. That's significant.
Yeah, instead of owning a house, you might be struggling to make rent payments. Instead of owning a car, you might be subject to the availability of public transit, which is spotty in some of these underserved communities. And then you have less disposable income to spend in the rest of the community, and that makes it harder to support a small business ecosystem in the community as well. And so it has massive impacts. And so I think one of the reasons why this report is important is that it shows pro-manufacturing policies, pro-worker policies have a good impact, not only maybe for white males who were in manufacturing, also for Black workers who were disproportionately impacted by all of this. And so Biden is on the right track. Just a great example of that. He had a steel worker as his guest as one of his guests at the State Union, Jojo Burgess, who I spoke to, who was up with the First Lady. And he can say the same thing. Like, his dad worked in a steel mill. He found a great opportunity coming out of the military, and his son is in manufacturing, and they're able to have these family supporting jobs. But those jobs, as Jojo will say, are far too scarce in these communities. So more manufacturing means more of these opportunities, particularly in some of these really, really disadvantaged communities that have faced structural inequities for decades in America.
Yeah, I mean, the report, although, you see, the terrible reality of how workers of color are disproportionately affected, it also offers plenty of reasons to be hopeful, right? Less than a minute left. Your last words.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing, is that if you have a strategy, if you have, and the Biden-Harris administration calls it a 21st century industrial strategy. If you have a strategy to increase these jobs and you're doing other things to make the quality of life better for workers all over the United States, including the right to organize, better communities to live in, and good benefits, and it will make a tangible difference. And so, we'll not return to the manufacturing economy of the 50s and 60s, and we don't want that, but we can build a new one that is more inclusive and that has more opportunities, particularly, I think, for Black workers who, again, felt the brunt of the deindustrialization that we've seen over the last couple of decades. There's a lot we can do to make a difference moving forward.
What a lot of stuff we got in. I learned a lot today. Scott, thank you for being with us. Scott Paul, president of the AAM. Go to the website, americanmanufacturing.org. On Twitter, follow them there at Keep It Made in USA. Follow Scott on Twitter at Scott Paul AAM. I'm Leslie Marshall. Have a wonderful weekend. Be safe. And I hope your weather gets as good as it is out my window. Have a good one.
Happy Friday.
You too.